Good morning. My name is Farid Khan. I'm the founder of Canadians United Against Hate and a human rights activist. And I'm here today with my colleagues to mark International Human Rights Day, which is today, and the United Nations Day of Commemoration of Victims of Genocide, which was yesterday. In the spirit of reconciliation with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, I'd like to begin my remarks by acknowledging that we are speaking today from the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people in the National Capital Region and the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Haudenosaunee, covering the Toronto region and the western parts of Lake Ontario under Treaties 3, 13, and 14. Joining me in Ottawa is Professor Nadia Abu-Zahra, a professor at the University of Ottawa, School of International Development and Global Studies, and a researcher with the university's Human Rights Center. And joining us via video are Rabbi David Mivasair, a human rights activist and founding member of Independent Jewish Voices, Dr. Aliya Khan, co-chair of Doctors for Humanity, and Saleha Faruque, advocacy programs manager for the human rights group Justice for All Canada. We could be speaking about a lot of different human rights issues today. Bill C-9, which is going through Parliament, which will restrict freedom of expression rights. Bill 9 in Quebec, which intends to suppress the ability of people to worship openly in public. And in Alberta, Bill 9, which is affecting or targeting LGBTQ2 people. However, today we'll be speaking about the abysmal state of Canada's international human rights policy, specifically as it relates to the genocide in Gaza. I'd like to call upon Professor Abu-Zahra to speak first, followed by Rabbi David Mivasair, then Dr. Khan, and then Ms. Faruque.
My name is Nadia Abu-Zahra. I am a professor of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa. Today, on International Human Rights Day, we note that at least 206 Canadians, including 49 who have done this recently, have served in Israel's military. This flow of soldiers active in genocide to and from Canada must be addressed immediately. To date, Canada has not lifted a finger on this issue, despite Canada's history of enacting policies to restrict the flow to and from of war criminals. Today, on International Human Rights Day, we note that Canada has distinguished itself, unfortunately, as, I quote, a pipeline of military goods, end quote, flowing to the Israeli state as it continues a genocide. Canada has sent hundreds of documented shipments of explosives and aircraft parts to Israel as Israel continues to drop explosives from aircrafts to kill Palestinians in their homes. Canada has helped transfer TNT to produce 2,000-pound bombs that are being dropped on unarmed civilians. Canada is, today, on International Human Rights Day, an active participant in genocide. Canada argues that it cannot lose the business of exporting arms. Canada needs to remove itself from the business of genocide. Today, on International Human Rights Day, Canada must set in motion steps to end the flow of weapons to and from Israel, a state carrying out a genocide. As one Canadian Member of Parliament said, history will judge us not by how we defended industries or alliances, but by whether we defended humanity. Canada must initiate a full and comprehensive two-way arms embargo on Israel.
Thank you. I'd like to now call upon Rabbi David Mivasair to speak.
Shalom Aleichem. I'm Rabbi David Mivasair, a Canadian human rights activist and an active member of Independent Jewish Voices Canada. We're here today to mark the 77th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We're marking it, but there's really nothing to celebrate. For 26 months, the world has watched in real time Israel committing genocide in Gaza through its relentless bombardment, its intentional famine, and industrial scale murder. Geneva-based Euromed Human Rights Monitor has counted over 75,000 Palestinian dead as of early November, more than 21,000 of them children, nearly 14,000 women. But Israeli military data, analyzed by Ben Gurion University professor Yaakov Garb and published by Harvard, reveals that the truth is far worse. Between 300,000 and 350,000 Palestinians are missing and presumed dead beneath the rubble, far above and beyond the official numbers. And yet, Canada has done nothing in response to this horror. No broad sanctions, no halting of arms shipments, no moral reckoning. As a Jew, I am heartbroken and furious. The Torah commands us 36 times, "You shall not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." The book of Deuteronomy says so basically and fundamentally, justice, justice, you shall pursue. And the Talmud teaches us that whoever destroys a single life destroys an entire world. Through the centuries, we Jews were rightfully proud of the moral demands of our religious tradition. However, in these times, Israel's criminal actions betray every one of these sacred teachings. What they do is not a defense of Jews. It is the idolatry of power dressed in our name, a blasphemy against the God who delivered us from Pharaoh's oppression. And as a Canadian, I'm ashamed to my core. Ottawa sells Israel the weapons and components that keep Israel's genocide machine running. We refuse to officially recognize the genocide, even as renowned Israeli Holocaust scholars Raz Segal, Omer Bartov, Amos Goldberg, and many others do. Even as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and our own allies, Spain, Ireland, Belgium, and Norway, name it plainly. Shamefully, we oppose South Africa's genocide case against Israel at The Hague and compare our response to Israeli crimes and Russian aggression. We welcomed Ukrainian refugees with open arms to the tune of more than 225,000 souls when Russia invaded the Ukraine, and yet have allowed less than 900 Palestinians who are family members of Canadians fleeing similar horrors to come to Canada. We heavily sanctioned Russia for invading Ukraine, but give Israel a free pass to annihilate an entire people. Through its words and actions, Canada is not protecting Jews, it's staining all Canadians forever with complicity in a crime that will live in infamy. But we still have time to do justice over cowardice. We must impose immediate sanctions and a full, meaningful, two-way arms embargo against Israel. We must endorse the ICJ rulings and join South Africa's genocide alongside Belgium, Ireland, Spain, and Mexico. We must work with nations that condemn Israel's crimes to break the criminal siege of Gaza that still restricts food, medicine, and life-saving aid from reaching the sick and dying. We must officially recognize that Israel is committing genocide and fulfill Canada's legal duties under the Genocide Convention. And we must support boycott, divestment, and sanctions until the occupation ends and Palestinian human rights are restored. We must vigorously investigate suspected Israeli war criminals on Canadian soil and properly prosecute them when that is warranted. And we must end the charitable status of organizations in Canada sending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to support Israeli settlers in violence. My friends, the souls of Gaza's children cry out. Our tradition demands that we answer. Justice, justice, we must pursue. Now, for Palestinians, for our own souls, and for the defense of human rights for all.
Thank you, Rabbi David. I'd now like to call upon Dr. Aliya Khan to speak.
Thank you so much. My name is Aliya Khan. I'm a clinical professor of medicine, and I am the co-chair of Doctors for Humanity. Our organization is representing more than 3,000 Canadian physicians across Canada, and we feel that Canadian physicians have a moral and ethical responsibility to speak out and condemn Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people. Over the past 2 years, we have witnessed more than 600,000 Palestinians killed by Israeli bombs, starvation, and disease, and close to half of those are children. We have been horrified to see the slaughter of children. Children have been blown to bits and burned to death as tents full of children have been bombed by bombs that Canada has contributed to making. 2,000-pound bombs dropped on tents full of children. Children have been shot at close range in the head, chest, and genitals by Israeli forces. And despite a so-called ceasefire and release of Israeli hostages, Israel continues to bomb Gaza and prevent thousands of trucks from entering Gaza with aid. Starvation continues to be used as a weapon of war. And babies continue to be deprived of baby formula and are being starved to death. All water wells and sanitation facilities have been destroyed by Israeli forces. All olive groves and farmland and farm animals have been completely destroyed by Israeli forces. And this makes life impossible in Gaza without aid. According to the British Medical Journal, 1,722 physicians and healthcare workers have been specifically targeted and killed in Gaza. Many of these were abducted and tortured before killing them. All of these are war crimes. Hospitals have been specifically targeted and bombed. And more than 260 journalists have been specifically targeted and killed. And international journalists have been denied entry into Gaza. This genocide of the Palestinian people and occupation of Palestinian lands must end now. Canada has a legal and moral responsibility to respond to the genocide unfolding in Gaza. Yet, Canada has demonstrated double standards, selectively choosing to express solidarity with Ukraine, as it should, but ignoring the genocide in Gaza and not standing up for justice and respect for human life in Gaza. We ask for the deployment of an international peacekeeping force in Gaza with immediate and urgent delivery of aid and an immediate end to the bombing of Gaza and respect for the ceasefire agreement. We must immediately allow the thousands of trucks waiting outside the border into Gaza. UNICEF has just reported that in October of 2025 alone, 18,000 new moms and babies were hospitalized because of severe malnutrition. This is unacceptable. We must also allow the wounded children from Gaza to come to Canada for medical care. And we, Canada, must join the international community in providing care for the wounded children. I'd like to end by reminding everybody that in World War II in London, 650,000 children were evacuated and 3,000 pregnant women were evacuated ahead of the bombings because those London children and the pregnant women in London, they were valued. Their lives were valued. And what we are showing is that the lives of children in Gaza are not valued, yet these children are targets of genocide. And these pregnant women in Gaza, instead of being saved, they have been bulldozed and killed. And we must end this. Canada must stand for justice and peace. Thank you.
I'd like to now call on Saleha Faruque to speak.
Thank you so much, and good to be with my colleagues in the human rights sector. My name is Saleha Faruque. I am a advocacy programs manager with Justice for All Canada, which is a genocide prevention organization with consultative status at the United Nations. Today is Human Rights Day, as was mentioned, and I'd like to talk about what this moment requires from Canada and how issues faced in occupied Palestine are both directly and indirectly being shaped by the choices made here at home. I appreciate the humanitarian perspective that was shared by the doctors in the room. I'd like to present a more foreign policy-centered perspective as well. So firstly, the world is naming what is happening in Gaza as a genocide. We know that genocide designation does carry significant legal implications, and it is the right move in an atrocity situation. Canada has so far not recognized the status of the genocide that is being conducted. Recently, Nadia Pillay from the UN Commission of Inquiry reaffirmed that Israeli forces are committing acts that do meet the threshold of genocide in Gaza. Just as recently as November, UNICEF reported that over 9,100 children were treated for acute malnutrition, as well as 1,600 children with severe wasting, which is the latter stages of starvation. Just in October, the United Nations documented continued restrictions on aid trucks entering Gaza during the so-called ceasefire window. And as a result, large areas of land have been left without adequate food distribution. The ICJ's advisory opinion that was delivered just in the same month did reiterate that Israel must permit full humanitarian access under occupational law, and it must cease practices that do contribute to these conditions of destruction for civilians. So the situation has amounted to, here in Canada, a number of Palestinian-Canadian plaintiffs who had effectively filed a lawsuit at the Ontario Superior Court on the 27th of November. This is a legal effort that was undertaken by the International Center of Justice for Palestinians and the Legal Center for Palestine. And they argue that Canada is breaching its duty to prevent genocide in Gaza, and it is violating the Charter of Rights by allowing military exports that contribute to these Israeli operations. So they did present a number of evidence that does include procurement records showing shipments from Canadian manufacturers into Israeli supply chains that happened well after 2023. And we do know that that United Nations treaty bodies have already warned that Canada is continuing to transfer the issue of goods, and that does place our government at risk of facilitating serious violations under the Genocide Convention. So in May 2025 of this year, the UN's Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination did find that Canada's export control system has significant gaps that allow military goods to move without any human rights review. And this also enables transfers into conflict zones that amount to serious violations, such as in Israel. In April 2025, the UN Disability Rights Committee warned that the Canadian government's continued military exports, as I said, is also contributing to grave abuses against people with disabilities in Gaza, once again placing Canada in that portion of breach of its international obligation when there is a clear harm that exists. Just last month in Parliament, MPs debated Bill C-233, otherwise known as the No More Loopholes Act. It's an effort that was also guided by or led by the Arms Embargo Now movement, as well as their worthy partners. This bill does something very simple. It closes the gaps in our export control system that still allow Canadian parts and components to move through the USA and into conflict zones such as Israel without any human rights review. In that debate, we heard the same arguments that have been used to protect these loopholes for several years. So MPs said that Canada already has strong strong controls in place. They said that closing U.S. exemptions would disrupt things like the defense supply chains. They said that stricter oversight might strain relations with Washington. But none of these points, as we know, actually confront the real problem that Canada's current system is allowing military transfers that escape human rights assessments entirely. And that is why Canadian components continue to appear within the weapons used in Gaza. So the Normal Loopholes Act should not be something controversial. It is the minimum standard requirement from a country that claims to uphold international law. We know that our country's responsibility do not just end with export controls. So yesterday in this very room, human rights advocates did gather to describe the experiences of hundreds of Palestinian students who were already accepted to Canadian universities who remain trapped in Gaza because they cannot leave and cannot meet biometric requirements that Canada's immigration minister, Lena Diab, has the power to waive. And those requirements have not yet been waived. And so if Canada accepts the risk of genocide in Gaza, we know that there are implications that follow and that protecting these students is a part of its duty to prevent further harm facing this population under persecution. So I'll just conclude that with this, we do call on the Canadian government to apply human rights standards with a sense of equality and fairness, and to treat the dignity, the protection, the safety of Palestinians as it has already done for other deserving victims of persecution. And we are ready to support any resolve that the Canadian government has on behalf of the Palestinian people and their human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saleha, and thank you to all the speakers for their powerful remarks and their calls to action. As we mark this day, I am both sad and angry at Canada's abject failure to uphold international law. Human Rights Day and the International Day to commemorate victims of genocide were established by the UN in 1948 to honor the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Genocide Convention. Yet in 2025, Canada's pledges to these covenants ring utterly hollow. After almost 800 days of Israel's genocide in Gaza, the facade of Canada and Western nations as human rights defenders lies in ruins. This country, which has long boasted about being a rule of law nation and human rights champion, has been exposed as a fraud and criminally complicit in Israel's genocide. The atrocities committed are horrific. As Rabbi David Mivasair mentioned, Euromed Human Rights Monitor reports over 75,000 Palestinians killed by the early November, 30% of them children. But an analysis by two Australian scholars published early this summer puts the death toll even higher than what Yaakov Garb concluded, at over 680,000 Palestinians dead from Israel's military assaults, starvation, and disease. These are lives shattered with Canadian complicity since October 2023. A poll published in Israeli newspaper Haaretz in June showed that 82% of Jewish Israelis back the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, while 47% of them endorse the mass murder of all Palestinians, including children. This shows that half of Israeli Jews support the genocide of Palestinians. It's not just something that is being conducted by Israel's political and military leadership. And yet there's no condemnation from Canada of this horrific racism. Anti-Palestinian racism also permeates our political, academic, corporate, and news media ecosystems, as seen in the firings of people who supported Palestinian rights over the past 2 years in efforts to suppress Palestinian voices, as Bill C-9 would do, and in the Monk debates last week, which platformed Israeli politicians who have advocated genocide. Additionally, Canada refuses to call Israel's action genocide, despite Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN, the ICJ, legal experts, and Holocaust scholars saying that it is, without a doubt, the crime of genocide. Even the October ceasefire exposes the West's hostility towards Palestinians. Israeli hostages have been freed, yet Israel's murder spree continues. Hundreds dead, including 2 brothers, aged 8 and 10, shot dead this past week for crossing an invisible line and framed as terrorists by a terrorist threat by Israel afterwards. And yet again, no condemnation of Israeli crimes by Canada or other Western nations. In all of this, Canada does nothing to enforce the Genocide Convention and in fact enables genocide. Both the Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney governments have authorized Canadian weapons shipments to be sold to Israel as it committed horrific crimes against the Palestinian people. And the government refuses to arrest and charge Canadians who have traveled to Israel to enlist in the genocidal IDF. Why Why is that, when these people are violating Canadian laws that have been used against those who traveled to the Middle East to join ISIS? When we were children, we were told that monsters lived in stories and fairy tales. As adults, we learn they walk among us, they wear suits and ties, and some are our political leaders, pursuing policies that stain this nation with the blood of victims of another genocide of Indigenous people. Yes, we need arms embargoes, sanctions, divestment, prosecutions of war criminals, and restitution for Palestinians. But we also need a Canadian government and politicians that aren't puppets of Israeli agents in Canada, ones who defend the human rights of all equally. We need a nation led by people with the moral clarity of those Canadians that drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Genocide Convention. That is the Canada we must have if we want to claim a moral high ground as a rule of law nation and defender of human rights once again. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci, ça conclut cette conférence de presse.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.